What is up, everybody? This is Adam. Welcome back to Fouled Out. The guys are going to be joining me today to start breaking down our top 30 players in the NBA. We've done this in years past. It's been a very popular podcast, but this year we did the list a little bit differently. Instead of Matt and I just sitting down and hashing out who should go where, we had our NBA correspondents join us, Devin and Clint, to give us their top 30 list to combine with my list and Matt's list and come up with a consensus list for the podcast. Consensus lists are always fun for me because we take four lists that everybody agrees with and we combine them to make one list that nobody agrees with. So we're going to be debating that starting today, 10 players a week for the next 3 weeks, starting today with players number 30 through 21. So the guys are coming right up. But before we get there, next Monday, July 17th, I will be going on the Dom That's True podcast, which broadcasts live at 9 p.m. Eastern, about 9:30 Eastern. If you guys want to check that out while I'm on there live next week, I will link their Twitch account in the bio so you guys can watch it there. If you don't get a chance to catch it live, they record the Twitch and they turn it into a podcast as well. So we will link that in the podcast next week as well. So live Twitch Monday the 17th. Their podcast comes out on Wednesdays. So that's going to be out on the 19th. If you guys want to check me out over there, we're going to be talking about the AFC East and my favorite team, the New England Patriots. So that's always fun. I feel like everybody wants to have me on their podcast nowadays to talk Patriots now that the Patriots suck. But I'll have a good time anyway. So the guys are coming up right now to do NBA Top 30. Let's go. All right, we are back. We got Matt, we got Devin, we got Clint. We brought in all of the NBA correspondents so that we could get in a virtual fist fight over who the top 30 players in the NBA are. How's everybody doing?
Great. I'm kind of disappointed that we don't have virtual stats about reach and all these other things to like have little sports card lineups for us. Like we dropped the ball on that one.
We should. We were too busy making like NBA top 30 lists in the past week to actually do boxing stats, but like maybe that's for next week.
Well, listeners, this is on you. You got to share this podcast so that we have the resources next year to make this happen.
This is true. We weren't going to do NBA top 30 this year. And then Matt was like, you know what we should do is we should just get in a giant argument that basically ruins our friendship for a month. And then we'll move on to something else.
It's essentially the pitch. Yes.
That's the pitch. And I heard that pitch and I said, you know what we should do is we should drag our friends into this as well.
Exactly.
So we brought Clint and Devin. I talked through it a little bit in the open, but basically we had all four people on this podcast make their own NBA top 30 list with very little instruction. The assignment is who are the top 30 players in the NBA in your opinion? And then we're going to put it all into a consensus list and make one big list that nobody agrees with. So we're starting out today going over players 30 through 21 on the podcast consensus list. Before we get to player number 30, I wanted to give a couple honorable mentions who just missed the list based on our point ranking system. Zion Williamson, Draymond Green, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Mikal Bridges were the guys who just missed the cut by like 1 or 2 points.
Big Bridges stand here.
I know Matt was hurt by Bridges. Triple J just won Defensive Player of the Year. He didn't make it either. So it kind of tells you like,
yeah. Well, and Bridges was runner up for Defensive Player of the Year a year ago as a wing, which does not happen.
Yeah, so there's some good guys who got left off this list for various reasons. Like I said, there's no criteria for how everybody makes their list. Everybody kind of approaches it differently, and that's what gives the consensus list a bit of a unique flavor. For example, someone like Zion, like I left Zion off my list completely because when he's healthy, he's undoubtedly a top 30 player in the NBA. But the problem is he's never healthy enough to show that to us for an entire NBA season. So that's something that like I take into account. You know, you guys might not have taken things like that into account. Like you weigh things differently, like playoff performance, health, different things like that. So the consensus list got very interesting at some points. And we're going to kick off today's discussion with player number 30 from the list. And that is brand new Suns shooting guard, Bradley Beal.
This is quite a shock. I have to say. I'm not too high on him. I guess I'm not super surprised he'd be at number 30 here. I mean, looking at some of our combined lists, it makes sense. I'm not like, completely blown away. Like, wow, how could this happen? But a few other players that I feel like Zion over Beal, like I would probably make the argument that, even if he is hurt a lot, I mean, when he's played, Zion Williamson has been nothing short of spectacular. Like his actual stats, like when he plays and his impact on the game is incredible to me. So I would probably personally weigh something like that over a player like Bradley Beal, like where he's like a number 2 at best. And even then it's like he's a shooting guard and his 3-point shooting isn't even that substantial. I don't know. I want to hear what you guys have to say about it though.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you how it happened, Devin.
Well, I see how it happened. I'm looking at it.
There are a couple players that we're going to discuss today made the consensus list pretty much because where Clint had them ranked. Bradley Beal is one of them. Nobody else voted for Bradley Beal. So let's let Clint make the argument for why Bradley Beal is included on this list.
I think Bradley Beal deserves to be on the list strictly because, given all of his, I don't want to say the turmoil surrounding him, he's not a problem. And when I was compiling my list, I kind of talked about it with Matt a little bit too. It's like, who, if I'm in a locker room or if I'm going to be a coach, who do I want like on the team? Like, who are people that I want to surround myself or that I want to play with? And Bradley Beal is like, depending on what time of the year it is and stuff, like the star on like a very, very below average team. And he doesn't cause problems. Nobody has bad things to say about his attitude that I'm aware of. And he comes and he produces, even though it might not be on a good team, he's still putting up numbers against players who are good. And I think that warrants like a spot on the list. And, as far as I'm concerned, availability, like wise, I don't think he's had too many problems with injuries throughout his career. I mean, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. But that's why I put him up there. Like, I think that he can have a little bit of a stronger impact on a game than people are going to give him credit for. And it's because he's on a team that kind of flounders and he's not really been put in a position to succeed because there hasn't been great pieces around him like that. And that's my justification.
That's fair. It's not his fault that he played for Washington,
And I don't disagree with anything that you're saying about his game, Clint. I think that game-wise, like Bradley Beal is absolutely a top 30 player. And intangibles-wise, I'd say he's probably a top 30 player. Where the reason that I struggled to get him on my list is that he has not played more than 60 games in a season in the last 4 years. The next highest was 57 and then 40 and 50 the last 2 years. So it's not that I don't like the player. It's just I don't know how much of the player I'm getting.
It'll be interesting to see how he does as a third option on a Suns team, with two guys that kind of do what he does in a similar way, but like at a higher level, really. Like having like a kind of like a 3-headed attack with 3 similar offensive players in that way would be very interesting to me.
I'm going to step in because I think all the points you guys brought up are very valid, but I in fact don't like the player. I don't like Bradley Beal. Like Matt said, he's played 207 games combined the last 4 seasons. The big red flag to me with him is that he looks like a guy who's already peaked, where he had a couple seasons where he averaged 30 and then it went down to 23. Like he's on the downslope. And typically when we see wings and guards who have like an arc like that, where they didn't average a ton of points and then all of a sudden they peak and then they start going downhill. It doesn't always come back. And his defensive rating the last couple of years, 117. Not horrific, but not great on that side of the floor. I just view him as a proverbial good stats, bad team guy, where he's out there, like to your point, Clint, he's been on a bad team for years and he hasn't had any help. And he puts up numbers, but like the numbers are decreasing. So he's kind of like a good stats, bad team guy that's not really putting up that great of stats anymore, because 23 to 24 points per game in the NBA, it's like, yeah, it's an accomplishment, but that's not the same as it was even like 2 years ago. Right. Like 23 is not as difficult as it was for guys a couple of years ago, where we're seeing a bunch of dudes average 30 and like more and more dudes average more and more points every year. So I'm not a huge fan. I think being the Phoenix, that like he's going to have an opportunity to prove me wrong, though. And that's something I'll be interested to watch this season.
Did he have catastrophic injuries, or was it just stuff here and there where he wasn't able to play?
It's kind of two things. And I'll give him some credit for this too. It's not like catastrophic injuries. It's like nagging injuries and like load management stuff.
Yeah.
But also I think you can make an argument with Washington that they're not super serious about competing. So they're probably giving him a few more nights off than he really needs.
Yeah. And that's kind of what my impression was.
Yeah.
And like the thing that I think is really interesting is I think there's a lot to say about players, like good players on bad teams, going to a situation where they don't have to be the number one producer. I wouldn't be surprised to see his like point generation be a little lower, but his defensive rating go up, because that's where he's going to focus on. So like in regards to those things, like, yeah, you can start to like explore different options that you might not have been able to explore in the past, strictly because like the team didn't need that at this point in time. Whereas now, like he gets to experiment. He's not going to be the person who's shouldering all of the load. Like if Phoenix loses a game, are they going to talk about Bradley Beal's play? Or are they going to talk about Durant's play? Or are they going to talk about Booker's play? So I just think that like the pressure is going to be a little like less for him. And I think that like that's going to be a really good thing. Plus he's coming into an organization that is starting to build a winning culture. And I think that that is going to be like a really big like shot in the arm for him to be reinvigorated, to be like wanting to love to play again.
I feel like in Phoenix, DeAndre Ayton could have 45 points in a loss and everybody else could play like crap, and the Phoenix front office would be like, fuck that Ayton guy, right? He sucks. So let's go on to number 29. The bottom, like kind of the bottom third of this list is a little bit more tumultuous than the top 2/3, because everybody kind of has the same top 15-ish in some order. And I think the majority of NBA fans that you polled would have, like, you know, we all know like Giannis and Jokic and Curry and all those guys are all going to be near the top. We all have that same opinion. The bottom 10 of this list is like, there's like 20 guys that you could put in here, and guys made or didn't make the list just based on how high they were within the bottom 10. And I say all this to say that we're going to go on to Clint guy number 2. Yet another guy who made the list because Clint voted for him and nobody else. But that is Pelicans forward Brandon Ingram. I'm more in support of this one. I'm going to throw that out there before we let Clint make the case. But Clint, why did you vote for Brandon Ingram so high?
Yeah, so his rebounds aren't super great, but I mean, again, he's scoring around 25 points, like averaging. His field goal percentage is about 50%, and he is also getting assists. Like if I'm looking at options and I have to pick between like head cases and like somebody like Kyrie Irving, I'm absolutely picking Ingram over Kyrie Irving. Like I haven't heard Ingram being a cancer in the locker room. Like he doesn't have off court issues, again, that I'm aware of. when I'm looking at these things, I think this is more about what I can put around him in order for him to be successful, because he's already like a really talented player playing on a team that has the potential, I'll say, to be good, depending on the health of the players who are like the stars. And when I'm looking at this stuff, I think that he's going to be easier to fit in and be successful than other people.
The thing I like about Brandon Ingram, and the reason I support him on this list more than Bradley Beal, even though I didn't vote for Ingram at all, a couple of years ago when the Pelicans made the playoffs, and they played the Suns, and they gave the Suns like everything they could handle in the first round when the Suns were the 1 seed. Brandon Ingram, offensively, very good in that series, 117 offensive rating while averaging 27 points per game. The defense in that series left a lot to be desired from him, 121 defensive rating, but he showed us that he can play when it matters, right? At least offensively. My issue with Ingram is just that I feel like he should be so much better than he is. And it comes down to a lack of consistency, because we've seen the ceiling and we've seen how good he can play. I just want to see it more consistently before I put him ahead of guys like Bridges and Zion Williamson.
I will say, in support of Brandon Ingram as well, is playing in a situation where your best player is, you're kind of knowing that he's going to be hurt all the time, or seemingly is hurt constantly, and then you're being basically forced into a role where you're being the number one option on a team. It's like, yeah, they're not really cracking into the playoffs or anything, but he is stepping up production wise whenever that ends up happening for his team. So it can't be easy when your number one is just out of shape and constantly injured.
I think he also gives you the ability to stretch your floor. I mean, he's 6'8". He's a little on the lighter side at like 190 pounds. If he could bulk out a little bit, that would be good. But he's one of those guys that I wouldn't feel horrible kind of slotting in wherever I needed. Like, I just say, hey, do your best. I don't expect you to get every single stop on, a power forward or a center, but I would imagine you'd do a little bit better job than like some of the other players. And when we come down and look at this kind of stuff, like, again, I think I approach the list a little bit different than most people, this is where you guys can speak on this, but if I'm just looking at like people that I can slot in and out, he does enough things well that I would take him over somebody who does one thing like really, really well. Because if I can't, say my guy's going to give me that consistent stuff, I know that he's going to give me at least 20 points and he's going to, grab some boards. And in the NBA, like, that's important.
I can't argue with anything that Clint's saying here, but
the whole point of this was to argue. Yeah. Like,
here, the argument that I have, though, it comes back to the availability. 45 games last year, 55 the year before, 61 the year before that, 62 the year before. So like, it's gotten worse each of the last 4 years in terms of his availability. So that's a concern to me. But if you told me he's going to play 70 to 75 games a year, yeah, I would absolutely swap him out with Lauri Markkanen for the 30 spot on my list. Like, no hesitation. Might even put him higher.
I feel like Matt and I are just hurt because we both feel like this should be Mikal Bridges' spot on this list, because we both voted for Mikal. We love him, but
and there might be another episode not in this series where we just wax poetically about him.
There's going to be an immediate follow-up to the NBA Top 30 podcast where it's just like, we remade the top 30 list and it's just me and Matt, and Mikal Bridges is on it. Damn it.
I had to pump the brakes to not put Mikal Bridges too high. Like,
I mean, you guys could do an episode just about how I snubbed him with all these fucking wild picks I have.
What I wanted to say this, and we're going to talk about it in more detail later because there's a certain guy on here that we really need to talk about from Clint's list.
yes, there is.
But Clint played the game very well. Like, there's so many Clint guys on here. The next guy is like a guy that's on there because Matt had a hand in it too this time, but
yes,
another Clint guy.
Yes.
But I was like, they played the game so well, and I'm like, God, if I really wanted my guys on the list more or like
you
higher,
should have
on
just
the
been
list.
irrational about it.
No, what I should have done is just made my vote worth 2. It's like when you try to tell your parents you want to go to McDonald's and you like outvote your mom, and she's like, well, my vote's worth 2, so we're going to Olive Garden.
like you could have just said, oh no, it just wasn't on there. It was Clint, you were the only one.
It's just my
like,
list.
Well, fuck, I'm gonna put him in the top 10 next time. Like, fuck you.
Ironically, like I saw all of you within like what, a 3 or 4 day span, so I actually could have theoretically had all of your lists.
You guys didn't see mine though until the very end, so I should have just done my thing. But let's go to 28, and it is, as I mentioned, this is where the podcast is going to get ground to a halt. Like, we're making pretty good progress so far, but now we have to talk about Memphis Grizzlies center Steven Adams.
My virtual background.
Matt went so far as to put a dancing virtual Steven Adams as his background for this podcast. And I thought for a minute you had a fake mustache up there too, but it turns out that was just the scoreboard of the virtual background.
No.
I think if it was up to Matt and Clint, he would not be 28 and he would in fact be like 13 or something.
I wouldn't have him that high, but yeah, I think I had him at 25.
I had him at 22, but I can understand why he probably should be lower.
Devin and I did not have him at all. So
yeah.
And I'll tell you why in a minute, but let's do the positive first. Why is Steven Adams on this list for you guys?
He's going to win you basketball games. I understand that the points are not there. The defensive side of the ball, he is absolutely one of the best in the league. And I know he doesn't necessarily have the block numbers, but I think he was a defensive rating of 108 last year. And that's like kind of the average for his entire NBA career. I think his rookie year, it was like 104 or something stupid like that. Clearly makes your team better. With Steven Adams on the floor this year, they were on pace to win 54 games this year, which would have made them the number 1 seed in the West. Without him, they were on pace to win 47 games this year, which would have put them under the Kings. And that doesn't even account for how poorly they played in the playoffs without him. And I just think that he's a tone setter. He is a massive locker room presence, and both on defense and on offense, he is where he needs to be when he needs to be there. And I know that the stats don't necessarily like indicate that impact, but like his offensive rating in his NBA career has actually been pretty damn high the last few years as well.
Matt, finishing below the Kings is not as much of an insult as you made it sound. He's like, oh God, without Steven Adams, they would have finished below the Kings. And like, yes, typically that means you're a lottery team, but not this year.
I had to take my shot.
Yes. My counter argument to all this.
Oh, hold on a second. I got to get in here because
Yeah.
you said something to me a little while ago with the Wembanyama stuff where it's like the NBA is supposed to be like a worldly product, right? We're trying to get we're trying to get a bunch of different people from a bunch of different places. This guy's from New Zealand.
Yep.
He's 6'11" and he weighs 250 pounds. And if I'm worried about somebody coming and hitting me in the fucking mouth, I want somebody who is like, I mean, we know Steven Adams is going to just like go rock somebody in the cocksucker if he has to. So like, absolutely. Like I would hide behind Steven Adams. Like, fuck.
That's a fucking shirt right there.
Yeah.
That's
what a
t-shirt.
great
Wow.
sentence.
So, but he does like a lot of things really well. And yeah, his stats might not reflect the impact that he has. I think he's a great locker room guy. He's going to be somebody who is absolutely going to get like involved when like shit hits the fan, and he's going to protect his boys. And that I think again is really, really important. And it's a morale booster. Like if I have that guy going to war with me, I don't have much to be afraid of.
No, I just literally can't get over the sentence "rock you in the cocksucker." Like I've been trying so hard not to laugh into my microphone for like the last. I'm like, okay, don't laugh. Clint's gonna think you're laughing at his argument. I was like, no, it's a beautiful sentence that's going on a fouled out T-shirt soon.
Very good.
That is the comment that is literally going to launch our merch store.
I had so many arguments about why Steven Adams shouldn't be on the list until Clint said that. I'm like, I can't argue with that.
I'm gonna give you some numbers to really like also add to the validity of his offensive like production to the team. Last year, not like super crazy, 118, but every year prior to that, 125, 122, 122, 120, 125.
Like offensive rating, correct?
Yes, correct.
He never shot below 50% from the field either, which means he's taking good shots.
Yeah. So here's my thing about Steven Adams is I agree with you guys that I think he's an extremely valuable role player, especially to a team of knuckleheads like the Memphis Grizzlies who need some sense smacked into them. But I think that's what he is he's a super valuable role player. Homeboy doesn't even play 30 minutes a game for the last like 4 or 5 seasons. He hasn't hit 30 since he was on the Thunder.
Yeah.
I think he's, like I said, a great role player. I'd love to have him on my team for all the reasons you guys mentioned. But when I'm talking about the top 30 players in the NBA, I'm like, give me 1s and 2s, right?
Well, maybe you should have specified that.
No, but this is how I approach the list. You guys, this is the whole point, is you guys do it however you want to do it.
Right.
It's what's important to you. But what's important to me is that if Steven Adams is my second best player, I am not going anywhere. You need more talent than that, in my opinion. That's how I approach this list. Is I'm looking at like, okay, if this guy's my second best player, if he's the 28th best player in the league, I would at least expect him to be the second best player on my team. Where am I going? And I don't think I'm going very far.
I would argue and I think we probably all agree, if Steven Adams is on the floor in round 1, they're absolutely going past the first round.
I don't agree.
I think you are dead wrong on that. And I think Anthony Davis would have been shaking in his goddamn boots. Every time someone's physical with him, he shrinks.
That's what happens when you're made out of glass, though.
Yeah, my thing with Memphis is that like it's not necessarily that Steven Adams wasn't there. Obviously, it doesn't help when he's that big of a key piece to your team. But that team was so weird. Like we talk about the vibe check in the NFL all the time. And it's like you got the Ja stuff, you got the Dylan Brooks stuff. You're missing Steven Adams. And like I said, like they needed someone to knock them some sense into those guys. But like when you lose game 6 by like 70 or whatever they lost that by, I don't care how good Steven Adams is. He's not making up that gap.
That's only one game though. And at the end of the day, like when it comes to the playoffs, losing one game by as many points as you lose, like come to the playoffs, like you got to get ready to go for the next game, and having Steven Adams on the floor for that is going to help you be ready.
I guess like my question here, and I'm curious to hear what Devin would say about this. How many players in the top 30, and this is probably another podcast discussion even of itself, so somebody's going to ape this and I'm going to get upset. But it's like, look at the 2004-2005 Detroit Pistons. How many of those guys are in the top 30? It's an anomaly, but like you can win with having 1 or 2 guys at the bottom of that list.
I see what you're saying, but I'm kind of in the same line of thinking as Adam on this. I think like I've always been a fan of Steven Adams. Actually, I do kind of view him as being a little bit more of a role player. I just don't think he's changing the tide of that series I mean, maybe defensively, I agree with you. Anthony Davis.
I think he
maybe
shuts down
shrinks a
Anthony
little bit.
Davis, and then I don't think they have the offensive firepower to get it done.
Well, I mean, he's going to be physical with LeBron on switches inside too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, but do I think he could be like? Do you view him as being the second best player on the Grizzlies currently, or just second most impactful?
I think he deserves more credit than he gets.
I mean, that's fair.
I think I actually had him rated higher than Triple J.
I mean, you had him higher than I did, I believe, Matt.
I actually did have him as the second best player on the team. And I'll use this analogy, and I know like Devin and Clint, you don't follow football the way that Adam and I do. And it's like he's reminiscent of like an elite offensive tackle to me, someone like Trent Williams, where it's like you can't calculate the value that they bring, but you can feel it. So can the other team.
Matt and I can feel it in our bones that we are going to hide behind Steven Adams if somebody picks a fight with us.
I agree with that.
I agree with that for sure. But
I think that has a lot
of list
value.
of NBA players that you would hide behind if you were going to get in a fight. I don't think necessarily equates to them being a top 30 player in the league, but
it's an element.
It helps. It definitely helps. I will say I've always viewed him as being like a pretty underrated passer in a few ways. I think
he's gotten better the last couple of years, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, but even when he played on the Thunder with like Russell Westbrook, I felt like a lot of the stuff those two would kind of run together would actually work pretty well in some interesting ways. So I think he's had that for a while, even if the numbers didn't always show it. But I like him. I'm a big fan. Not a big fan of the 36% free throw shooting, but
what about the 33% 3-point shooting back in 2019, 2020?
on 0 attempts per game. They can't even calculate.
Yeah, I'm going to throw one more point out there. Because we got to go on to the next guy. But I had 3 Grizzlies on my list who were not named Steven Adams.
Well, that's where you fucked up.
He's not even the best defensive player on his team.
I disagree with that.
Triple J, better defensive rating and defensive player of the year this year. So
I'd say Triple J was the defensive player of the year. Like, what do you guys mean he's not?
But
But
can you hide behind Triple J in a fight?
Exactly.
You cannot.
No. That guy's going to punch right over his head and hit me square in the fucking nose.
Well, you're really tall. The rest of us are not. The rest of us probably could hide behind Triple J. I just wouldn't feel confident that he would protect me like I would with Steven Adams. So, let's go on to the next guy who is a dude you definitely could not hide behind in a fight. But also, I just wanted to mention, like, the podcast getting a little like cagier now. This is how it happens. Like, by the time we get to 3 and we're in the top 10, we're gonna be like, your list is bullshit. Number 27 is one of my favorite players in the entire NBA. Pacers point guard Tyrese Halliburton. I love Hallie. I was devastated when the Kings traded him away, even though it appears that it might have been for the best at this point. I just feel like he is the most fun player to play with in the entire NBA. And he is like the advanced stats god at this point. 4th highest offensive rating of anybody who's going to be mentioned on this list at 129 last season. PER of 23.6 was 14th in the NBA. And his offensive box plus minus of 7 was 5th in the entire NBA last season. Super fun to play with, super efficient guy. Shoots 40% from 3 on 10 plus attempts per game. He doesn't stay healthy though, so far. And I think that's why I had him a little bit lower. And also, like, before we start moving him up the list, can we just like be 500 or better? Like, we had this argument last time. It's like, can we just be on a team that's 500? But he's one of my favorite players. How do you guys feel about Halliburton?
I mean, I'm kind of right in line with you here, Adam. I actually literally had him ranked exactly 27th. I mean, skills wise, he kind of offers everything I could possibly want out of him. There's the injury risk, and there is like you said, the translation to wins. In fairness, obviously, like it's not entirely on him. He went from the Kings prior to this year, who were certainly not winning games, to the Pacers, who still, despite having a lot of players that I really, really like, which I don't know, maybe I should reconsider some things because of that. They have not won games in a few years either. So, like, what is there to show for what he's doing? And I mean, that's kind of where I'm pumping the brakes on not shoving him up closer to 20.
I'm a big fan of him. Not a lot of players, we were talking earlier about how easy it is for guys now to average 20 a game, average 25 a game. You don't really see a lot of guards average 20 and 10, 20 points, 10 assists. It's actually like quite a bit more rare than you would think. In the draft that he was in, he was such a sure bet, yet so many teams passed on him, including our Detroit Pistons, Matt. And it was like everyone was like, you got to take this guy. He's going to be good. And I think, the biggest knock on him was that his jump shot looked weird and that nobody thought he was going to be able to shoot or like get his shot off against defenders in the NBA. And he's just clearly proven that to be not true. And along with the playmaking is just, he's incredibly efficient.
Mm-hmm.
The injuries for sure. That's a bit concerning. Hasn't really been on a winning team, but I just think what he brings in terms of efficiency and obviously I think his personality, I think he's proven himself to be a leader even at a very young age. So I'm a big fan.
Clint's the only guy who didn't vote for Halliburton. I feel like he's just waiting for us.
I mean, it goes back. It's kind of like the Bradley Beal argument you could make for him. And it's like, it's just like, okay, so you're averaging 20 and 10, your efficiencies, your field goal percentage is almost 50%, which is like nothing to sneeze at, right? Like that's pretty good. But it's like, okay, I don't think he's moving the needle for me in the way that like some of the other guys that I put on there. And obviously, like I'm gonna have a bias towards bigs. Like I think Adam, you can totally, say that there's a lot of bigs on my list that I put on there. And I think that they have like a pretty big impact. And that's probably because I'm like gonna be a boomer and say that I don't want to see 2 dribbles and a fucking 3 launched within, the first 7 seconds of the shot clock. Like it's not the kind of ball I like to watch, but it is what it is. However, I will say this man, I'm looking on the ESPN website right now. He's definitely in the top 30 for best like headshot in the NBA. He's got a good smile. He looks like he's happy to be there. Like I'd put him on that list for sure. Like absolutely. Looks like a pleasant guy to be around.
Yeah, before we go to number 26, the only thing I wanted to mention is I think you guys are absolutely right that you could use the same argument as Beal. It's like, yeah, it's great stats, but what has it really led to so far? I give him a little bit of a break on that because he's only been in the league for 3 years and he's been on bad teams that are, like the Pacers were tanking last season. They shut him down for a large portion of it. So now that they've spent some money this offseason and brought in some veterans and kind of done some stuff, I want to see what he can do. But it's kind of going to start getting to the point with him where it's like, hey, if you don't make a play-in game, you're not pushing for the 8th or the 7th seed. What are we doing here? You start questioning that. So all valid. Number 26, another guard that I feel like none of us actually wanted on our list, but just if you're making one of these, you kind of have to have him somewhere unless you're Matt, who had him at 0. That is Hawks point guard Trae Young. I think I had him the lowest out of everybody who voted for him.
I feel like this is my fault. If I would have,
you and I voted the same. We both put him at 22.
Clint and Devin had him same spot, but it's like nobody really likes Trae that much at this point.
No,
like personality wise and game wise, but like you have to acknowledge that he can be and sometimes is such an offensive juggernaut that you kind of can't keep him off here.
So, Adam, I want to point out it's your fault that he wasn't on my list.
But didn't you have you missed somebody, right?
Because I totally forgot about Ant.
Yeah, I did the same thing though. I got done with my list. I was like, I feel really good about this. And I look back at it and I was like, Jaylen Brown's not on it. That's probably not right. I feel like Trae Young's very divisive because a lot of things that we've said about people so far, he's good offensive player, but he's kind of like an ISO guy. Kind of the offense has to be centered around him. When it's not his turn, he kind of watches everybody else play. Not really like a ball mover, even though he gets 9-10 assists per game. It's more of like I'm going to ISO. And when the guy comes to double me or cut me off while I'm driving, I'm going to kick it out and get an assist that way. But we've seen him play very well in the playoffs. Averaged 29 and 10 against the Celtics this year in a first round loss. And I can't get that Eastern Conference Finals run where they upset the Philadelphia 76ers and ended Ben Simmons' career out of my head. He was so good and so unstoppable in those playoffs. In 16 games, he averaged 29 points and 9.5 assists and got all the way to game 6 against the eventual champion Bucks. And it's I know it's not that recent, but those are the type of things I think about with him. And part of me thinks that it's in there, but God, does everybody hate him?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's a good point because you just said that it wasn't that recent and, the grand scheme of, everything. It's not, but everyone loved Trae Young 2 years ago. Sports media, everyone was a big fan of Trae Young after that playoff run in 2021. And I mean, if I'm just going off of pure numbers here, how he played in the 6 games against Boston this year wasn't that much different. I mean, it was more or less the same. And it's just, I understand. I'm not a fan of his play style. There's a lot of things. I certainly wouldn't want to be a teammate of his, most likely, just in terms of how that offense is going to be ran. But it does seem like, the last couple of years, his team just has not really found their footing. They haven't been successful, and it's all come down on him in an interesting way where I just feel like, I don't know, 2 years ago is recent enough for me where it's everyone was a big fan of this guy. They're calling, they loved how he's, taunting the other team during playoff games. And then just a year later, everyone's like, oh, he's not a winning player. And it just happened very fast to me. I mean, again, I'm not a huge fan of him, but
I think my big issue is he's a point guard, and I think a volume scorer point guard is rare. And he shoots 43% from the field, which means you're missing a hell of a lot more than you're making. And that's a liability. And I mean, he's undersized, right? He's 6'1", not super big. And that's not to say that he's a bad player, but it's you have all of these kind of things that, okay, he's going to get you 26 points per game, where I think right now it looks like he's 10th in the league, and then his field goal percentage is 110th. And what does that mean? It means you're either losing out on offensive boards, or you're getting guys stat pads or whatever. So that's kind of my issue with it. I think the other thing that is interesting just to kind of take a look at is as a point guard too, his 3-point percentage hasn't been over 38%, which in a point guard, I feel like in the NBA, if you're going to be really, really good, it needs to be higher than that, or you need to have more efficient field goal percentage. So, I mean, I had him up there at 22nd because I think he makes a big impact when he's on the court. And I think that around the right group of guys, he could probably get that tenacity. He's going to start jawing. People are going to get, irritated and that kind of thing. And that can be, again, a morale boost if you're playing with him. Outside of that, he just looks really abrasive. And I recognize that. And it sounds like Devin does too, a little bit. As far as those things are concerned, if he could clean up his field goal percentage and, be a little more efficient in that regard, I think he could be a a better player in the league. But until that happens, and until he comes through and really starts to show that like they're going to win games in crunch time, then I'm kind of just lukewarm on him. I mean, I was higher on him than everybody else was, but I'm not like excited to have him, on the list.
Yeah, I think that's how we all feel, including the Hawks. I mean, we saw the DeJounte Murray and Trae Young experiment together doesn't really work this season, and the Hawks decided to extend DeJounte Murray this offseason. So kind of tells you like where they're leaning with Trae.
Yeah, I look at Trae and I see the same player, possibly even less efficient as that player as he was 4 years ago as a young player in the NBA. When I look at that and kind of look at what he's done in the playoffs since that Eastern Conference run, his numbers, the playoff entrance, it all feels empty.
Yeah, I think if you would have made this list after that Eastern Conference Finals run,
he would have been probably top 15.
Top 15 for sure, because everybody felt that way right then. And then everybody's kind of really cooled off on him. And I think Matt's cooled off the most, but I think some of us are still kind of like, yeah, but at the ceiling, it's in there. So,
but there's a chance.
Yeah, there's a chance. So, number 25 on our list, we're going back to big guys now, and that is Toronto forward Pascal Siakam. Another guy who, if you made this list at a different point in time, like after they won the championship, would
have been much higher on him.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
super high. Kind of cooled off since then, but still like a really complete player. Really like solid guy who's very consistent. Averaged 24, 8, and 6 last year as a 6'9" wing. But to me, a clear number 2 on a contender. Like if he's your best player, you're not going anywhere. And I think we saw that in Toronto this season. But if he's your number 2, like you're cruising, you're pretty excited about that.
Full disclosure, he wasn't on my list. Like I didn't put him on there. And I know that he did cool off, and it like his numbers reflect that he probably should be on here. But again, it's about like the supporting cast around him, and his production could be lower, but he makes people better. And when he's the focal point, he might get 25 to 30 points a game if he's playing really, really well. But what is he doing to help his teammates out? I don't know if he is going to be a guy that you're going to say, okay, like, yeah, I'll count on him for that every single night, and he's going to make other people better around him. I don't think he's a lightning rod in that regard, which is why I didn't put him on the list.
I agree with a lot of the points you guys are making, but I do disagree in the sense that I think he's a much better player now than he was in 2019. I mean, they won that in that title run for Toronto. He had that big game 1 in the finals, and he had some big performances throughout it, but that was Kawhi's team. I mean, Kawhi went crazy that series. And I think he's a much more complete player now than he was then. And I think he's quite a good facilitator. He averaged almost 6 assists per game this season.
Yeah.
I do agree that he's a number 2, but I don't know. Like, I mean, I think he's a pretty good number 2. Like I'm pretty high on him as a player, actually. His 3-point shooting has never really been there. Not really a huge part of his game, but he's incredibly well-rounded. It can kind of give you a little bit of everything. So it's like, just looking at Toronto, kind of the situation they've been in the past couple of years, I can't really put a lot of their lack of team success on him just not being a good number 1 option. I mean, there's quite a few other issues with that roster that I think, have kind of left them in the position they're in. But I'm a fan of him. I definitely agree that he's not a number 1, though.
Yeah, it's funny. We're actually not going to hit a single player today that everybody voted for. Like the first guy that all of us voted for landed at 20. So every single guy we talked about, someone didn't have them on their list today. I agree with you, Devin, that he is probably a better player now, but I think like the perception of him has gone downhill with the Toronto Raptors not being as successful since Kawhi's departure, which like is obvious, but during that playoff run, he had kind of his coming out party. And I think they kind of people would look at it and be like, wow, like what can that guy be? Can he be the number one on a championship team? Maybe he can. Like people kind of projected him that way. And now it's like, we kind of know he's a really good number two, maybe a little bit overqualified to be your number two, but you need someone who's going to be higher on this list on your team if you're going to be really successful. Like Pascal Siakam cannot be your best player, but he's a very good player. And that's why I had him like in the mid 20s as well.
Yeah, but he's a guy that with his ability to score from both the mid-range and the inside and his ability to create for others, like he can make your number one better. And like that's a really underrated value, I think.
I will say, as big of a fan of him as I am, probably the most awkward 24 points a game you're ever going to see somebody score.
Oh, absolutely.
Like you look up at the end of a game, you're like, oh, Pascal Siakam, 32 points. That was weird looking.
Oh, he stumbled his way there.
Yeah, he just kind of looks like he's going to fall over every time he drives to the basket, but then he doesn't. Like
He's like the offensive Kurt Rambis.
Yeah.
Yeah. Modern Kurt. Yeah, I also just think it's funny with Siakam that they're like, oh, yeah, we could trade you kind of wherever you want to go. Where do you want to go? And he's like, if you trade me anywhere, I'm just going to re-sign in Toronto. So like could have gone to a contender this year. And he's like, no, I'm just happy here. I just want to be here. Like
that's kind of a plus too. Like that buoyed him a little bit for me. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. So we're going to go to number 24 and number 23. This is one of only two ties that we have on our list. I sorted it in the way it sorted. Jalen Brunson landed at number 24. I had Jalen Brunson higher than this. I had him at 20. And I have all these stats written down and all these great things he's done. Like the Knicks are 10 wins better than they were last year since they added him. He's got all these points. He was great in the playoffs. He did all these things. I really think the only point I need to convince people to come over to my side on Jalen Brunson is that he took Julius Randle to the second round of the playoffs. He had Julius Randle on his team, and he made the second round of the playoffs.
I'll drag my thing over on Zoom onto your side of the screen, Adam.
I think that's all you need to know.
Poor Julius, man. I mean, I'm with you. I just, I feel bad for the guy.
Any Knicks fans that's listening to this is like, fuck yeah, this guy gets it.
Oh, yeah.
He knows what he's talking about.
I think anyone who's watched Julius Randle in the playoffs, I think
there's no defense.
They understand. Yeah, he's always so bad in the playoffs. I don't understand it, but anyway.
There's a Knicks fan out there wearing Timberlands and a New York Yankees hat who thinks we're friends right now, and I want to assure you that if you are a fan of New York sports, we are not and never will be friends.
Damn.
Ever. Hate New York so much.
Just kind of piggybacking off what you said, I think he's like he was clearly the savior for the Knicks, at least this season. The fact that Dallas didn't pay that man what they could have paid him and kept him is ridiculous. With all that whole, gotta find Luka a second star. Oh, we got Kyrie Irving. It doesn't work. I guess we need to get some more pieces. It's like you had your second guy. Like he was there. I don't know. What he did was really impressive to me. And while they, didn't make it past the second round of the playoffs, I mean, they went up against the Heat, and the way he scores, the way he kind of contributes to a team is very interesting to me. He's kind of undersized. He's a good 3-point shooter on like a lower volume than a lot of other guards. But the way he scores in the mid range and how he just kind of shoves people around in the paint and just kind of gets these weird like flip shot things that aren't really, I don't know. He gets to the paint in a very interesting way and scores, and it looks gimmicky a few times when you see it, but the fact that he can keep it up throughout the playoffs and just through a full season is it proves that it works and it's effective.
All I'll say on Jalen Brunson is I was very hesitant to say that it was going to really work out with him coming to New York, being in the number one role, because obviously like that's a very different situation compared to playing next to Luka. But I will gladly eat my crow. I had him at 25. I think 24 is totally appropriate. And what he did against the Cavs, who certainly thought they were going to handle that series just fine. He absolutely fucking stole their lunch money, and it was kind of fucking beautiful.
Punked them.
Yeah, 31 points per game against the Heat in 6 games in the playoffs too. Like almost single-handedly dragged the New York Knicks to the Eastern Conference Finals. Like nobody was helping him against the Heat, and the Heat were absolutely destroying them in that series.
The thing that I want to point out, and if we revisit this list next year, I think I might be a little higher on him. But if you look at his points per game and just his numbers overall, there's a consistent increase since like his second season in the league. Like at his average 8.2, 12.6, 16.3, 24. Like that's really promising. And I think if he develops a little more, that like those numbers could, he could continue to average or get better in that regard. And that's where I would argue his point of like, okay, so yeah, he has to be the volume scorer on a fucking team that's dog shit, but it's like they've stumbled into some like decent players as well as like not having great ones. So I just think that I would like to see how he does next season when he's been with those guys for longer than, like 68 games or however many games he played this year.
Yeah, I just think it goes back to what you mentioned earlier about making everybody else on your team better. That team was 37 and 45 last season, 47 and 35 this season. So 10 more wins. And the biggest change was that they brought in Jalen Brunson on a deal that almost everybody at the time like panned and was like, this is horrible. It's way too much money for him. Looking back at it a year later, they have him for $25 million a year for 3 more years. That's an absolute steal.
Yeah.
Like,
he got a dog in him.
Good job, Knicks. So on to player number 23 on our list is a player that, again, this is the last guy, but nobody voted for this guy except for Clint. Everybody had him at 0, and Clint had him at number 7 on the list. And this is what I was saying earlier when I was like, the top 15, everybody kind of has the same people, except for Warrior shooting guard Klay Thompson.
Hell yeah, man.
Clint, the floor is yours. What's going on with you and Klay Thompson? Why is he so high on your list?
Matt and I kind of talked about this at the office the other day too. So I'll pick and choose who I want to defend of like playing games versus not playing games. I think when he was injured, like coming back from the injury they had is pretty tough. And I think that overall, even though it might not be reflected currently, like this guy was one of the best shooters in the history of basketball. And I think that at this like point in time, we're coming off like a lot of injuries. We're coming off of a lot of uncertainty, just trying to get back into the swing of things. I absolutely think that he can bounce back and have like a really good season. Is it going to be as good as it was back in like 2017? Probably not. But I think that like he is that big of an asset that like you could put him out there and he could casually, get you 28 to 30 points a game if like Steph isn't hitting all of his shots. And I think like, all right, I'm going to trust him a hell of a lot more than Jordan Poole. Like he's proved it. Now, like his conditioning and his body, how that's going to hold up is kind of to be determined. But like his pedigree to me tells me that I would absolutely want that guy in the locker room, even to help mentor players and that kind of stuff. And at the top 10, the expectation is not for you to mentor players. And I can certainly like empathize with that. But for me, I think that like his past is going to show us that like, yeah, he'll bounce back and he will be closer to what we would expect him to be than he was this year. And that's just kind of like how I feel about it. Plus I just really like watching him play. Like that's like the other thing. And that's where my bias will come in. Like, yeah, I got a soft spot in my heart for this guy. So that's my defense. And if anybody wants to come fist fight me, I'll do it.
Steven Adams with you.
Yeah.
Clint's a big guy.
Yeah. So on that last note about him, like his style of play, I can appreciate that. I do on some level really like that he's like he was one of the like really big time stars in the NBA that had that like or at least strong elements of that like Rip Hamilton, Reggie Miller, like
Oh yeah.
I'm an off ball, I'm gonna run off screens and like make you fucking hate life, and then I'm gonna drain threes all day long. He was better than anybody else in the league. And granted, nobody else was really trying it the same way that he was, but like he was absolutely by far the best at that. Problem is it's been a few years since we've seen that guy. And the thing that I think made him, for me, like an elite player in the NBA on top of that was being an elite defender. And I'm not saying that I don't think he still plays good defense, but I think that's actually where I've seen him regress the most as a player. I just think he's lost some of that lateral agility to stay with guys. And certainly some of that could be the injuries, but he was 32 last year. He's going to be 33 next year. And hey, he's a far better athlete than I am, so maybe that doesn't mean as much. But I can't imagine like recovering from, really injuries like a couple of years ago at 33 years old.
Yeah, I'm going to make the same point I feel like every week, that in real life, if you just turn 33, it's not that old. This is not real life, though, and 33 is kind of old. For those who don't know, Matt and I are both 33. I just turned 33 yesterday, actually. My concern with Klay Thompson, and the reason that I didn't rank him at all, statistically, like the counting stats, if you look at what he did this season versus what he's done in the past, it's actually very close. Like from the points per game and rebounds and assists and stuff like that. But the efficiency is not what it used to be. He's settling for a lot more threes than he used to. During like his best years, he would shoot 7 or 8 per game. He shot 11 per game this season. And while it was okay because he actually shot them at a pretty high clip, the
41%.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah.
Still a great shooter, but I think one of the things that was really underrated about Klay's game when he was, unarguably a top 15 player in the league is that he could drive and he could get by guys and get to the rim. And like Matt said, he had the lateral agility to defend guys on the perimeter at a very high level. And when you see guys, like we're seeing this with LeBron James right now, when guys get older, their legs get a little bit more tired. They start settling for more threes. They're happy to take some of the longer jump shots. And if they're going in like they were for Klay this season, it's not as big of a deal. But like when you get to the playoffs, I just watched him in a 7-game series against my team. He shot, I think, 39% from 3 for that series, but 38% from the floor. So, he's settling for a lot more threes. He's not getting to the rim the way he used to and finishing inside. And I honestly, like, over a 7-game series, I just wasn't afraid of him. And that's something crazy to say about Klay Thompson, because before the injuries, I mean, he missed 2 full seasons with brutal injuries, and he's bounced back very well, honestly. Before the injuries, he was, Mr. Game 6, Mr. Knockdown shooter. And while he's still a very good shooter, I found myself being like, God, if we could just get the ball out of Curry's hands and into Klay Thompson's, I feel better about this. And like, part of that's Curry, but like, I feel like that wasn't always the case, where it's like, God, please let Klay Thompson shoot this time down, because I can't watch Curry shoot another 3.
No, it used to be like, God, let's just go Draymond into a 3. It still really should be the play, but
yeah, I feel like it's going downhill for him a little bit. 117 defensive rating this season, which was his worst ever. And it's like, is it a longer lasting effect of the injuries he can bounce back from? Is it the fact that he's getting a little bit older and, it's tough to maintain your athleticism, or what's going on there? I think, like Clint, if you're right and he has a big bounce back season next year, I think he springs right back onto everybody's board. But I don't know if that's going to happen at this age with the injuries that he's sustained.
And like I recognize that I put him real high, and I'm okay with that. And again, it comes back down to like team composition. He would be a guy that I wouldn't sneeze at him being on my team. Like I would be happy with that, even if he's not like producing like he used to. I'll use language that you guys would use in your football world, the intangibles. It's like, well, what the fuck does that mean? And it's like, yeah, like I just like him. I like what he does. And I think that like with the off season, he shook off the rust a little bit in the regular season. If he gets healthy again and really gets his legs under him, I think that like he can have a better season next season.
Fair. So player number 22, and this is where Clint almost got kicked off the podcast this week. I feel like I'm picking on Clint because his list was yours was very different from the other three of ours. But we're talking about my boy, Kings forward/center, Domantas Sabonis. Clint left him off the list completely. I was like, man, if there was like one guy who I didn't think Clint would leave off his list, it's like a big who just had an amazing season. But nope, not even there. Why? Why did you do this to me, Clint?
Yeah, I just like, I don't know if it's so when we were kind of putting this together, I was like talking with Matt. I was just like, well, how are we supposed to do this? And I'm like racking my brain against like people that I'm like consistently hearing in the media. And I don't know if it's because I'm just totally out of touch with, the West and California and all this other stuff. But like the Kings are not like that sexy team. And I did not think like when we're talking about like Sabonis here, I like that was not a name that like came up when I was doing like a lot of the just like looking into stuff during the season and whatnot. So he's like a quiet guy, of course. Yeah, he had like a really good year. But I did not think that like there was enough noise about him, I guess. And maybe that's my ignorance, and I'll totally take that along with my Klay being at number 7. Like I'll own those things. Like that's fine.
The man was like a consistent triple-double threat throughout the entire year.
But like
no,
I never heard people being like, this guy is the fucking man. And it's just like, well,
no,
I mean, also one of those things where it's like, yeah, that I mean,
no, I'm yeah, I will say it's like it was when when watching the season last year, it was like there was all the hubbub about the Tyrese Halliburton trade and how Sacramento was stupid. Like when they made that trade, everyone was just ripping that team apart. And last season,
including me,
yeah, like and last season, it was you don't really see it too often in the NBA. Like when a trade just seems to work out really well for both teams, and it was one of those kind of anomalies. Now Sabonis did not play outstanding in the playoffs, but I don't really think a lot of that was like him choking or anything. I mean, Adam, I'll let you speak to that, but I think he's an incredible offensive player. Very unique skill set. Seemed for whatever reason has sort of also unlocked De'Aaron Fox in a way where their 2-man game is kind of improved him as well.
Yeah. So now that the Kings have locked him down long term with an extension, I think that trade is a win-win. My biggest fear was that he was going to come to Sacramento, be awesome, and sign a max somewhere else just because we're Sacramento. For those who don't know, because I think Clint is actually like really on to something here, that like he could be awesome and have an awesome season, but he's on the Kings. So everybody's just like, eh.
Yeah.
19 points per game, led the league in rebounding at 12.3 while dishing out 7.3 assists. Offensive rating of 132 this season.
He's 10th in the league for field goal percentage as well.
Yep.
Damn.
Offensive rating of 132, which is going to be the third highest of anybody on this list, only behind Jimmy Butler and Nikola Jokic for the season. Number 2 in the NBA in win shares this season, only behind Nikola Jokic. I think that you could make an argument for him to be way higher on the list than he is. I had him the highest at 18. I wanted to have him a lot higher, but Devin hit the nail on the head. The playoffs are tough, man, and it's really hard to judge him because he had a broken hand. Draymond stomped on his chest and like fractured some stuff in his chest when he stomped on him.
Yeah.
And then really the big problem though is that the Kings were really like De'Aaron Fox was unlocked this season by Sabonis because of the dribble handoff game that Woodson installed on the Kings offense. And the Warriors completely shut that down by crowding the dribble handoff on one side and then sagging off Sabonis on the other. And the Kings had no answer for it.
Yeah.
And it made Sabonis like, honestly, there were large portions of that series where the Kings were better with him off the floor. And that's kind of where I knock him is it's like, I know he was injured. I know he had the stuff with Draymond, but like, if you're supposed to be the second best player on this team and we're better with you off the floor and like we'd rather play Alex Len and Trae Lyles against the Warriors, it's a scathing indictment. So that's why I knocked him. And I feel like this is an appropriate place for him because of how good he was in the regular season and how bad he was in the playoffs. Like 20s, high, like, or low 20s is probably okay. I had him at 18. I think Matt and Devin, you both had him like 22 or something like that. So,
yeah. And I want to say, in fairness to Clint here on the media stuff, they were the 3 seed going into the playoffs, and the media was talking more about the Lakers winning the championship than the Sacramento Kings coming out of nowhere to be a 3 seed.
Yeah, that's true. Because a lot of any talk you'd hear on the Kings, it was like, oh, they're going to be breaking their curse of not making the playoffs but there wasn't as much talk about individual players on the team, I feel like. So, I mean, that's completely fair.
Well, welcome to Sacramento, everybody. This has been the story since ever since they moved here, but especially in the early 2000s. But last player for today. So player number 21, the final guy we're going to talk about today is Denver Nuggets point guard Jamal Murray, newly minted NBA champion. I think that people are probably going to give us crap for not having Murray as high as I think like the general consensus on him is. But for me, it's the consistency for him. It's like he goes out and drops like 40 and 38 and 35 in all these playoff games. And then he has like the 16s and the 12s of the world as well. So
he's trying to share.
He's like it's not his job. His job's to score. Let Jokic share. I don't know. I kind of downgrade him for the fact that he plays with Jokic as well. Yeah. Which probably isn't fair, but it's just like you play with the best player in the world who makes everything so easy on everybody. Like, I question how good you are without him next to you. But Matt, you didn't have Jamal Murray on your list at all. This is your turn.
I'm not gonna lie, I straight up forgot about him. I think this is probably a fair spot for him. But like my criticisms are kind of the same. Not that they've always been. Devin, you and I kind of talked very recently about his evolution, but like he is a very, very explosive scorer. But the consistency isn't necessarily there. Where I do want to give him credit, though, is that I think he is definitely become a much better and more consistent playmaker for others. Like that, I don't think was necessarily a super high level part of his game in the past, especially like before the injuries. Not that it wasn't something that he was capable of. It was just he wasn't as dedicated and effective at it as he is currently.
In like the last 2 games of the finals, he didn't really play too well, but for the majority of that playoff run, I mean, he increased his scoring average by like 4 or 5 points. I mean, he was averaging like 27 points per game in the playoffs, probably up until, I don't know, sometime in the finals there when some of his games just weren't quite as strong. But I think he's proven that he can play better overall in the playoffs. I do agree with what Adam said, where Jokic just makes the game so easy for everyone. So if you're a guard with the skills that he has and you're not averaging 26 points per game, like it'd be a bit concerning, but also it's kind of, you also have to give him credit for being that kind of a player. I mean, they traded away Bones Highland because just seemingly couldn't play with Jokic. Like, it was a weird thing. So, and like, we've talked about Michael Porter Jr., Matt, and like, it's like, is Michael Porter Jr. really that good of a player?
No, he's not.
He can score the ball, but he doesn't really do anything else. Jamal Murray is a pretty complete guard. So I think it's like fair to give him credit for, being the second best player on that team and saying that the majority of that is because he's a good player, not necessarily because it's just Jokic. Yeah,
I believe that Jamal Murray can still score the ball if Nikola Jokic isn't on the floor. If you're talking about Michael Porter Jr., I do not believe that man can score the ball if he's the best player on the floor. I just don't.
No, but that's why I feel like 21 is probably an appropriate place for Jamal Murray. My point is more just, I think that people will look at the playoffs this season and be like, this dude's a top 15 guy in the league right now. And I just knock him. I don't have him up there. And it's like I said, he was great in the playoffs. Don't get me wrong, but it's the inconsistency. And then like, I can't separate how good you were on the big stage from how easy Jokic made the game for you. And it's kind of the same thing with a lot of like second bananas. It's just like, God, how do you appropriately rank this guy? Because I feel like you take anybody on this list, like you take Jalen Brunson and put him with Jokic, like he's probably absolutely killing it too. Like, we haven't talked about Donovan Mitchell yet, but like Mitchell or Fox or Anthony Edwards, are those guys better than Murray with Jokic? Right? Like Murray with Jokic versus them with Jokic.
Yeah.
And is Murray as good as those guys if he's not getting set up by Jokic all the time?
Something that I think is really interesting, if you look at his regular season numbers compared to his postseason numbers, it's almost like 10 points a game difference. Like over his career. Like, it's phenomenal. And I believe when I started to take notice of him, and I could be wrong, I feel like it was the bubble season.
Yeah.
When he fucking popped off in the playoffs that year. And I was like, this guy's probably going to be special. And I think that like regular season numbers don't reflect that. And he's kind of a guy that you would like to see him score more consistently in the higher numbers and have those like huge games. But he's the guy who it's just like, okay, he shows out in the playoffs and his performance is way better. So I mean, I put him a little higher than I think. I think I got him around like 19. So yeah, right about where he should be. But I think that like he's absolutely that kind of caliber of player. And if he was on a different team, he might be able to shoulder more of a load, but he doesn't need to. And like, to me, that's okay. If I can count on him for 25 points in the playoffs a game, because he's shown us that he can do that, like, I am totally content with that.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the point of like, we have to go to war and we know who we want to go to war with. Is he one of those guys? And I think
absolutely,
like undoubtedly he's one of those guys. It's just like, if I'm drafting point guards, I think I'm taking like the Foxes and the SGAs and like the other guards of the world before I take him, because I don't know that he can be the best player on a championship team, but I think some of those other guys potentially could be. He's like one of the more overqualified second bananas, but he's still a second banana to me. And that's why he's here though. And it's like, it's a somewhat appropriate ranking as long as you didn't completely forget that he existed.
And credit to him, yes, like Jokic, even though, yes, like Jokic makes everything easier for everyone. Like, that's true and valid. And Devin, also, you sitting there in the darkness is
It
incredible.
keeps getting darker. It just keeps getting darker and darker, and I'm not getting up to turn my light.
He knows we're
But
signing
light
off
on,
soon,
light
and
on,
he's
sorry.
like
Yeah.
slowly fading
Yeah.
into the darkness as we sign off.
But what I will say to counter that a bit is that I think Jamal Murray has actually shown a very high level of understanding of how to play with Nikola Jokic
Yeah.
and displayed like a higher level of basketball IQ than maybe some other guys on this list.
I think
It's
it
all
really
in
goes
favor.
into the team mentality, and it's like if you have true synergy of a team, it's going to be greater than its individual parts. And I think that's what you get with Jamal Murray and with Nikola Jokic. Like, I think that those two guys synergize really, really well. And I think it's really hard to argue against that. Now, in a vacuum, again, I'll go back to my Sabonis thing here. Like, Jamal Murray's not a sexy player. The media is not clamoring over him. They're not climbing all over him to get interviews and shit. He just comes in, does his job, and then like goes home. And you can count on him for that. And sometimes he'll go off and he'll have really, really good games. But yeah, he's not going to be the sexy guy that you're going to put on tickets to sell games. And that's okay. Like there's a place for players like that. And he got a ring. So, like, he has a hell of a lot more to say than we can.
And the place for players like that right now is number 21 on the consensus list. But
I was gonna say he'd better have synergy with Jokic after playing with him for like what 6 years now, 5 years.
God, yeah.
well, they say like consistency and having the same guys year after year is actually one of the biggest advantages you can have, especially in the NBA. So we will have synergy and we will have the same guys back next week to break down NBA top 30 players 20 through 11. That is it for us. As always, you can find Fouled Out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Cast, Overcast, anywhere you get your podcast. You can hit us up on Twitter at Fouled Out Sports. You can find Matt on Twitter at Matador_defense. And you can find our videos on TikTok at Fouled Out Sports Podcast. It is a long name, but you can't miss it. As a reminder, for everybody listening, I am going to be on a live Twitch stream on July 17th, which is next Monday, on the podcast Dom That's True, to talk about the New England Patriots and the upcoming 2023 football season in the AFC East. That is at 9:00 Eastern time live on Twitch. And then it's converted into a podcast that you can get on Spotify, Apple Podcast. Anywhere you get us, you can listen to that. And we will link all of that in the episode description this week and next week as well. So you guys can check out that podcast too. Devin and Clint, thank you guys for being here. Thank you for all your hard work on this list. We will see you guys next week, same time, same place, to go over players 20 through 11, starting off with a bang, because I am not happy about where number 20 landed.
If anybody wants to talk shit about my picks, send all of that hate to Matt. He is the easiest way to get at me on the internet. So just
this is like the best thing is like, yeah, we're like, yeah, you can hit us up on Twitter and blah, blah, blah. And Clint's like, if you want to talk shit about my picks, you can come fight me. You know where to find me.
Yeah, send it to my Twitter. I'll read it all in the office.
Beautiful.
You can record my reactions to it too. That'll be like a little extra sauce.
We'll put it on the Patreon.
Very good.
Beautiful. So thank you guys again. We will see you next week.
Take care.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye, Robin.
Bye, Mom.